Fellow Falcoholics, what is up? Welcome back to the Falcoholic Live. I'm your host, Kevin Knight at Falcoholic. Kevin, we are here for episode 296, almost 300. We're getting closer and closer as we get. It might line up directly with week one. We'll see if I have to skip a show or not, but that could be big if true. So we'll see how that works. We might just have to have one that's mysteriously not numbered to make the math work. But I've got, once again, two tremendous folks with me tonight. First of all, my co-host Adnan Ikic. He's at Say Which Way. Adnan, welcome back. How you doing?
I'm doing well, no longer in the trenches, officially back to my regular day job. So, minus about an extra week of PTO or so that I had to take to, go back and forth to Flowery Branch. But also, let's not do show 300 week one. I don't think I'll be here week one.
Okay, well, we'll fudge the
Yeah.
math to make it work. We'll figure out some way to do it. Yeah.
Punch it over to week two or something.
Yeah, absolutely, we will. So we'll definitely figure out some way to make the math work. But yeah, training camp in Flowery Branch officially ended on Monday. It's now joint practices in Miami, and we had to get, of course, someone that was going to be boots on the ground for you guys. We can't just speculate on news. This is preseason / joint practice season, and of course, we've got Daniel Flick back with us. He's at by Daniel Flick over at Sports Illustrated's Falcon Report. Daniel, welcome back. How are you doing today?
Yeah, my personal boots have been on so many different grounds in the last like 2 days. But I could not be happier to be back on the Falcoholic live show. I think it's my first live show in a while, so hopefully I'm not too terribly rusty. I have a very trusty big gulp on me right here that I'll be tearing into throughout this show, and yeah, man, I am excited and ready to roll.
Yeah, me too. We got lots to cover. Obviously, a good practice at the Benz for sort of the big send off, and then we were expecting a quiet Monday practice. Didn't get a quiet Monday practice. It was actually pretty busy, and then of course two joint practices with the Miami Dolphins. Today's unfortunately cut short due to Rondale Moore's injury. We're going to talk about that here in just a minute. Before we dive in, folks, real quick, want to bring you word from our sponsor. It's BetOnline, folks. BetOnline is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for everything online sports betting. And right now, you can receive a 50% free bet up to $250 on your first deposit to bet on anything: the Olympics, baseball, Formula One racing. I know the Braves are in a little bit of a slump, so maybe you want to bet on the comeback. You could do that or not. Probably not, but whatever. Whatever you want to do. I'm not here to judge. And they've got every stat, every matchup, and even live odds and spreads while the games are being played. When the game's over, you can head on over to BetOnline's online casino, get in on a game of blackjack, poker, unwind with over 150 available slots games. So what are you waiting for, folks? Head to that website today, BetOnline, to get in on the action. Just remember to use our promo code BELIEVE. That's BLEAV for your 50% bet credit on your first deposit up to $250. BetOnline, the game starts here. All right. Well, unfortunate news. Falcons had been having a merciful camp thus far, but we did unfortunately see Rondale Moore go down. It sounded like it was pretty scary, to the point where they canceled practice. He left, I believe, with an air cast on his leg. But Daniel, perhaps you could give folks a little bit of an update. I know there hasn't been anything announced in terms of official injury yet, but yeah, unfortunately, we got to lead off with this. So.
Somber mood. Very interesting. So essentially, what happened on the play, I don't think anybody really saw what happened with Rondale. So it was Atlanta's number 2 offense, and Penix was at QB, threw a pass to, I want to say, Josh Ali, and the Atlanta was working left from where we're sitting. So he threw it into the far right corner of the end zone, and Rondale was on the near side left corner of the end zone, away from the play. And then from the sounds, from what other reporters who were in that area said, it was non-contact. Again, I didn't personally see Rondale on the route. I was watching the ball. And so, but yeah, so he went down, and then within probably a minute or two, a cart came out. There was a very big huddle around him of, trainers. And I think I saw Ike Hilliard walk over there. It was at that moment when I saw Ike Hilliard that I was like, okay, it's a wide out. And then it just kind of, evolved to where the whole team was there, and everyone was on a knee. And then eventually Rondale was on the ground for a long time, probably about 5-6 minutes. It was a really, really extensive process. I want to say from the time that he fell to the time that he was lifted and carted off was probably about 7 or 8 minutes. Um, Completely on a stretcher, entirely immobilized, had a towel on his head. And then the way that Miami's practice facility works, it's right across the street from Hard Rock, but there's like a direct line right into their hospital, and so he just went like right through their tunnel, went into there. Right after it happened, I want to say like 20 minutes or so later, Atlanta's PR staff came and said that he has been evaluated for a lower right a right lower body injury. That was the last update that we've heard. But yeah, the cart that he was on came back our way about 10 minutes later with his pads, his jersey, and his helmet, and that was the last that we saw of his white number 14 jersey for the day.
Yeah, definitely unfortunate. I think it looked like, Ray McLeod had definitely had the advantage at wide receiver 3. So Moore maybe not exactly a starter, but I mean, I think it was clear that the team really liked his potential to be a gadget player, to be a guy that could do a bunch of different things. I think he was one of the players that they had in motion most of the time. And I think we were all excited to see what he could do, even if it was just depth. You're going to need your receiver depth at some point during the season. So definitely a scary scene. We'll hope for the best there, but at this point, obviously, it looks bad. We'll have to see it. Hopefully, it's not as bad as it looks. But yeah, anytime you hear aircast, that's usually going to be a season-ending injury. We don't know anything further than that it was just a right lower body injury at this point. But hoping for the best for Rondale. And Adnan, what do you anything you want to add about Rondale? I know you and I were both pretty much thinking he'd be the wide receiver 3. So I mean, even if he ended up losing that battle to Ray, which looked like he might, I mean, it would still be a big loss to have one of your top 4 receivers go down.
I mean, yeah. Well, first of all, I just feel gutted for Rondale Moore, just on a personal level. And that's the first thing that I sort of thought of when I read about the injury. I think the first thing that I saw was D-Led posted a picture of someone on the Falcons being hurt, but I don't know that he knew at the time that it was Rondale. And then, later on, Daniel reported and Josh Kendall reported that it was Rondale Moore. And, I'm just sort of gutted for him because this was really an opportunity for him coming from Arizona, having that sort of change of scenery that a lot of players flourish in after they get it. Rondale Moore is a very talented football player. He wasn't a second round pick for no reason. It didn't really work out in Arizona. But the thought after the Falcons traded Desmond Ridder for him was, all right, he'll come in here, he'll maybe win that wide receiver 3 job, and he'll have a chance to really set his career sort of on the right path with that change of scenery here in Atlanta. Now, I don't know if he was going to win it, but I do know so far in camp, Ray McLeod has been the wide receiver 3. He is the slot receiver. And Rondale has been the number 1 guy with the second team. He's been Michael Penix's favorite target, and no doubt that wide receiver 4. But we still had the entire preseason ahead of us, and you never know who was going to sort of win that job because there's always been, the past few years, a guy takes the lead in training camp on the depth chart, and then someone else jumps him come preseason. Now, unfortunately for Rondale Moore, it doesn't look like he's going to have that opportunity. And, hopefully, by some miracle, maybe he's not out for the season, but it certainly, from all reports, looks like he is. And I mean, I hope that he'll have a chance next season. I think he's on an expiring contract this year. I think this is year 4 for him, so I don't think he's signed in after this year. That's the other thing. More than anything, I hope that he gets healthy and that he's healthy enough to where this isn't a huge detriment to him in free agency. Because at one point you just have to like sort of think about the person more than anything. But when it comes to the Falcons, yeah, it is a loss. Losing one of your top 4 wide receivers, your main depth wide receiver, and a guy who maybe was going to be a starting slot guy going into week 1, it really does suck. But the one bit of sort of good news, if there is good news here, is that it happened so early now in training camp that next year he should probably be good for week 1, and it probably, hopefully, won't really affect his earnings too much come free agency.
Yeah, that's the hope for sure. And Daniel, anything else you wanted to add on Rondale Moore?
Yeah, Adnan, you mentioned in there that he's worked primarily with the twos. He caught a pass from Cousins today, with the ones, and so like he has, I want to say he had 2 or 3 snaps with the ones actually. So like he had a few snaps like that, like last week in practice, but like he kind of had that ramp up period today to where it looked like he started, blending in more with the ones, probably more than he has at any point all camp. Um, and so from that perspective, you really have to feel for the guy too. I mean, because again, this is he's had a rough summer as far as he had I want to say hamstring injury and OTAs that had him miss a week. And before that, him and McLeod were kind of right with each other in that race. And after that injury, he kind of came back and was pretty clearly the number 2 there. And then felt like he was kind of finally starting to close in a touch. I wouldn't say, extensively, but at least a little bit to where a strong preseason probably reopens up the race. Really feel for him. Really good dude. Really genuine and truly not, a long talker, but somebody who, when he spoke some pretty good stuff. And I really enjoyed, the few times that I had him one-on-one, and really hoping that, he's all right.
Yeah, absolutely. And it always sucks. Like there's no way around it. It happens. Like it's gonna happen more. Unfortunately, it just always sucks when it does. And yeah, the only silver lining is hopefully it's not as bad as it looked, and that he'll be totally good to go for next season at worst. And we'll just have to wait for the medical staff. But, he's got 2 football teams' medical staffs looking at him at this point. So if anyone could figure it out, Miami is certainly known for their medical staff, and the Falcons team doctor, I'm sure, was on hand as well. So, yeah, I'm sure he's getting the best care, and we'll hope that he's good to go. Hopefully sometime this season, but worse, maybe next offseason, ready to hit the ground running. And, the Falcons clearly like him. So I think he at least had a chance to show up in training camp and hopefully at the very least demonstrate that he deserves a shot next year. The Falcons could definitely give him another 1-year deal or something like that if he does have to miss a lot of time, and give him a chance to make the roster next year as well. Because the Falcons are still going to need receivers. This receiver group is far from finished. So we'll hope for the best going forward with not Ray. Please not Ray. Jesus. Rondale Moore. But yeah, I mean, the other side of the coin, obviously, is we're going to see more opportunities for the guys lower on the depth chart. Probably Casey Washington is going to see a higher snap share as a result. Maybe some of the new signings, like James Washington, Jesse Matthews, could get a few extra looks. Obviously, I mean, Kadero Hodge, like, he's going to play. So I feel like Kadero Hodge is like the safest wide receiver, like 6 in the NFL. Like, he's just like, yeah, he's gonna make the roster. It's fine. Nobody really cares. Yeah, he'll be fine. So like, Kadero probably doesn't need any more reps. We know that he's solid and is gonna probably make the roster as a special teamer. But yeah, we'll see how they divvy it up. We'll see who steps up. There's going to be an opportunity for someone else at this point, and we hope that certainly they can seize it and make the best of it. But yeah. Before we get to the joint practices in earnest, let's talk about the practices that we haven't covered yet, in terms of, the Mercedes-Benz practice, which I know was exciting, and then the Monday practice, which was surprisingly good. Yeah, Adnan, I'll let you sort of take the lead, on anything you want to cover from those practices. It sounds like the offense was hot in the Benz, and we saw some good things from the defense at times too.
Yeah, no, if we are going to start chronologically with the Benz on Friday, first of all, it was, the Falcons fed us well in the press box. So that was.
I was jealous. Yeah. It's like, man, I should have got down there for that one.
Yeah, I mean, that was great. I mean, they had some soft serve ice cream for us at one point, where I remember at one point during the practice, Daniel just disappeared. And then, he comes back like 10 minutes later just with some ice cream in his hands. And I'm like, oh, okay. I guess this is what we're doing today, huh?
This is happening. Yep.
It's true. It's all true. It's all true. It's really good too.
But yeah, no, on Friday it was very impressive day by Kirk Cousins, especially. So days, I'm trying not to get my days mixed up. Days 4 and 5 were the first two padded practices on Tuesday and Wednesday. And Kirk Cousins sort of, we talked about it on the day-to-day recaps. Kirk Cousins sort of took a step back on those days, and as is natural with the defense, allowed to be a bit more aggressive. And the completion percentage was still there, but most of the passes were of the very short variety. Jesse Bates got that interception on Tuesday, which was the first pick that Cousins threw in camp. And then it just sort of felt like Kirk Cousins put something together on Friday where he just kind of reminded everyone of, who he was, and where he just sort of reminded everyone of why the Falcons were paying him that much money. He went overall 17 of 20 in the practice on Friday, including a very impressive showing in the 2-minute drill where he went 4 for 4 and set up Younghoe Koo for a very long field goal. And Younghoe Koo, by the way, was also very brilliant on Friday night as well. We hadn't really gotten a chance to see him kick very often, but he made multiple 50-yarders. It was 6 for 7. But yeah, Kirk Cousins, that was my biggest takeaway. He at one point had 15 straight passes completed up until the very final one. He just diced up the defense, and it was impressive given the fact that it was in pads. He also he locked in Drake London too. Like Drake London had his strongest day during training camp on Friday, and that sort of told me something in regard to, you can only have so many takeaways while guys are in shorts. And yeah, sure, the ball is getting spread around and all of that is fine. But then it's when the pads come on and when you get in front of the fan base where you really sort of develop those habits that you're going to lean on during the season. And Friday really told me that, yeah, Kirk is going to try to spread the ball around a little bit, but when push comes to shove, his alpha wide receiver is going to be Drake London, and he's going to lock in on Drake London. And Drake had, I think, 8 catches overall out of Cousins' 17 completions. At one point, he had 4 straight catches, including 2 really good ones against AJ Terrell, where Terrell had really good coverage, and Drake just sort of took it from him. It was very impressive. Michael Penix, a much shakier day on Friday. It looked like the nerves were out when it came to Penix. His first 5 of his first 6 passes were incomplete, and all of them looked to be sort of his fault. They were all either overthrows or shots off target. One of them was almost picked, I want to say. But then he sort of bounced back a little bit as well. One thing I'm really impressed with Penix is he has a really short memory. Even when things aren't going his way, he sort of doesn't really care, and he's going to go out there and he's going to take his shots and he's going to get his looks no matter what. And seeing him all camp, it was a very up and down training camp, but even in the midst of some of those practices where he wasn't really on point, you can just tell that the arm talent is so special, and the ball just sort of zips out of his hands no matter what. Like every single practice he had at least one throw where you're like, wow, like that was a throw that not everyone can make. He goes 10 for 19 on Friday, and the most impressive part for him was he also had a 2-minute drill where he went 4 for 5, overcame a sack, overcame a bad drop from Rondale Moore. But yeah, overall it wasn't the best practice for Michael Penix, but he 6 of his 10 passes were all deeper downfield, 10+ yards. That's something where I don't all camp, I wasn't looking to just give you the completion percentage. I always wanted to give context behind that completion percentage. In these last 2 practices, Michael Penix was slinging that shit. Like he was taking his shots. He was going deep downfield. It feels like, it almost feels like he's not sort of checking the ball down enough, and he's always looking for that like deep shot. And that's something where it's going to come with age, and it's going to come with some time and with work with Kirk Cousins and some of the quarterback coaches where you know I think like Penix is going to realize eventually, hey, I can just take this little check down and go for a few yards. I don't have to go deep every single time, but it's been entertaining as hell watching him, take those shots. And it's going to be really entertaining watching him do so in the preseason as well. Um, JD Bertrand had 2 sacks on blitzes on Friday. The other big thing from Friday and from the first practice, or from the last practice at Flowery Branch on Monday, is that Carlos Washington has taken a stranglehold of that RB3 job. We thought that Jason McClellan was in the lead, but yeah, Carlos Washington looked like the best runner out of everyone on the roster on Friday. He had some problems with those blitz pickups a little bit, and on Monday with Bijan Robinson out, I guess it was a maintenance day for him or a rest day. Washington got carries with the first team next to Tyler Algier. He was the only other running back to do so, and yeah, Carlos Washington, he is right now firmly the running back 3, I would say, and that's kind of surprising because before Friday, I would have told you that it's probably Jason McClellan's spot to lose as of this moment. But that RB3 battle is going to be it's going to be a war between Washington and Jason McClellan and maybe even Avery Williams in there. But that's going to be the battle for me to sort of watch for regarding that 53 man roster come the preseason.
Yeah, no, that's a bunch of good intel in there, and yeah, I mean, I was fascinated to hear about Carlos Washington. I mean, I think we all liked Carlos Washington last offseason too. There just wasn't really a way for him to make the roster with the sort of the roster the Falcons had constructed. But this year, there's an opportunity. Like I have no doubt that if he outplays Jason McClellan, that he will get on this roster because I don't think this. I mean, Jason McClellan. Obviously, you'd like your draft picks to make it, but if one of your holdovers outplays him, you're not clearing space for 6th-round picks, right? So we'll see how that develops. But yeah, Daniel, curious your take on those 2 final training camp practices as well.
Yeah, Adnan just completely crushed it. I mean, that was as thorough as he could get. So I expect nothing less. But yeah, I think there's only one other thing I wanted to add from Friday, and that is Adnan mentioned that London was really good. I think that Cousins to London had probably their most impressive single rep connection of the entire offseason. It was a 35-yarder right sideline, right over AJ Terrell's outstretched hands. Perfectly thrown pass and an incredible catch. That was an NFL play, an NFL throw, and in a very realistic environment with a very good corner on a very good receiver and a really good quarterback throwing a great ball. So you can't always, judge how like, applicable or whatever a pass in camp is. That was a legit NFL throw, NFL catch. So that was one other note that I wanted to add from Friday. From Monday, I thought that Penix had probably his most impressive showing since the very first official training camp non-walkthrough practice, which was the Friday before Mercedes-Benz. So about 10 days in between. He was 8 of 11 and extremely sharp. He had a read. It was a touchdown to, I want to say, Josh Ali, where his eyes were left in the flat to Ross Dwelly. He completely broke off of it late, rolled right, or not rolled it. His eyes rolled right. He had it flipped, threw a bullet in stride. Really good pass in a pretty tight window. That was impressive. And I actually asked Atlanta's QB coach about that earlier. And he talked about, the way that you can see him progressing, the way that he's working through his route patterns and his reads and everything for where he's at now. It's one of the things that they really, really like about him trait-wise. But he had another throw that was like that yesterday here in Miami that was very impressive. And so for Penix, I thought that was a very strong day. At this point, I think Kirk Cousins was like 9 of 10. It's just like, it's what you expect out of him, right? He's been extremely efficient throughout all of camp, very effective. His one incompletion, however, was an interception. He went, I want to say it was to Mooney, right sideline. AJ Terrell was on top of the route, inside leverage. And Kirk actually talked about that today. He said that, if that was a route on air, it was a really good ball, but it's not a route on air. And so he went up to Mooney after the play and was like, hey, it would have been a really tough catch, but I have to throw it here. And he kind of put it like outside and up. And so he kind of underthrew it just a touch. But again, he was extremely sharp. Um, the Carlos Washington note that Adnan had was very, very much so true. I thought he had a great day. Monday followed it up with a great day Tuesday, which I'm sure we'll hit on here in a little bit. But he was really impressive. And, I thought that the way that Atlanta's rotations kind of shifted were interesting too, because there was three defensive linemen and Jarrett Smith Williams and Taquan Graham who were all not present. I want to say Jarrett was had an excused absence for a personal reason, and then Smith Williams and Graham were off in the weight room, just kind of hanging out with whatever. They were completely fine. Have been fine so far in Miami, so I'm not really sure what happened, but with that created some spots available, some snaps available. And Atlanta rotated a lot of bodies and had a lot of really interesting fronts. So where a lot of guys who, throughout camp have worked with the threes were, in with the ones. And then just it was really interesting seeing the various packages. I think they had one rotation where there was like Anya Mata on the field with like Brandon Dorless and Malone was out there. And it was like just a really cool package because it's like you got guys who are legitimate starters playing with guys who are very much so on the roster fringe, and Malone and a few others like that. And so it was kind of neat to see that. But I thought as a whole, considering what we expected Monday to look like with really light stuff, it ended up being pretty competitive. And I thought Penix in shorts, it was all in shorts, and so how applicable, how representative of him is it? Hard to say, but he looked good in shorts, which after, a rough few practices, or what I would say were rough in pads, I think he kind of needed that. And it's kind of carried over to a pretty impressive joint practice session here in Miami.
Yeah. No, and I know everyone's itching to talk about the joint practices too, because there's even more to get to there. But yeah, I appreciate the breakdown. And yeah, I mean, I was glad to hear on Monday that we didn't just get like sort of a walkthrough, right? I mean, it was nice to see more action, and I know you guys appreciated it, and it sounds like the practice in the Benz was an exciting one as well. And kind of set the stage for what we're about to start talking about, which is of course these joint practices in Miami. The Falcons are going to be playing Miami in the preseason on Friday, and you can watch along, not play by play here on the Falcoholic Live, as we're going to have a watch party, not play by play show here. Just got to check those legal
I wish they would
boxes.
just let us have our freaking play-by-play, bro. Like it's like 200-300 of us. Like we're not really harming anyone, but
We're stealing that sweet ad revenue. All done. They need clicks. They need clicks. But yes, we regardless of it will not be play by play, but it will be a fun show where you can come, where we talk about approximately one in every three plays. And maybe two in a row occasionally. But either way, we're gonna have a great time. So you guys can join us here on Friday. We'll probably go in live just a little bit before the game and go through.
They're just taking everything from me. Like the play-by-play show. The play-by-play show was I think my favorite show that we would do every year. Like the play-by-play in the preseason, and then they took that from me. They took like me being able to video record 7-on-7s from me. They took away my ability to tweet play-by-play on 11s from like. I don't know,
They've
man.
taken everything from me.
Where are we coming to at this point? What's left?
Yeah, I don't know, man. It's out there, but yes. Either way, we got some.
Next year they're gonna send us a note. You guys can't have a live show while the Falcons are playing.
Yeah, that's just not allowed. There's a new no, but yeah. At any rate, we got some in preparation for the preseason not play-by-play show. We had two joint practices, and I know we have Daniel, who was on hand for both practices. Obviously, today's was cut short due to the injury, but a lot of stuff happened. So let's get to it. Daniel, I know everyone wants to know, bottom line, did the Falcons get embarrassed by the Dolphins? I think that's the main thing most people want to know is like, were we completely outclassed by Miami? Should we go ahead and phone it in for the rest of the season?
It's really funny because like the very first incident was one-on-ones. I was on the field and I'm watching this. The first like 3 reps on each side is just like, I think Drake London won his rep, and then I think Mooney got dominated and McLeod got dominated, and Rondale Moore got clamped so bad that Ramsey was saying some things I can't repeat. And I was just like, oh, this is this is off to a flyer for the Atlanta offense. And then I look over and I'm seeing Miami's receivers just mossing guys. And I'm like, oh, this is not off to a pretty start. If you're a Falcons fan, but I had this in my lead yesterday, my after practice recap from a play that happened in 11s of I think it was Drake London came across the formation left to right. It was a play action ball, and he was supposed to run in the flat and got blindside leveled and was on the turf, but he pushed himself up, and then Cousins hit Kyle Pitts for about a probably 5, 6, 7 yard play in the red zone. It was so short, but it was still a play that I would call a success. And that's how yesterday went. I think it was Atlanta started out rough, slow. Part of it too, and I mentioned this as well. Their flight got pushed back a little bit. For as rough of a travel day as I had Monday, theirs was not a whole lot better. But they got in about 8 or 9 o'clock, I want to say, on Monday night, and they were expected to get in, I want to say, around like 5 or 6. So that kind of hurt. But again, it was also just a bit of a slow start. But as it progressed, they heated up. I thought offensively, I had Kirk Cousins at 15 of 22. He was it was a lot of short stuff, a lot of underneath. But again, very effective, very efficient. He led a really good 2-minute drive. I want to say it was 7 of 8. He hit Kadero Hodge twice for probably his 2 largest throws. He had about a 20-yard out route on the right sideline to Hodge. That was his most impressive throw of that part. I will also say with Cousins, he had a very good one-on-one portion throwing, again, routes against Miami secondary. He had a really good ball to London, who beat Kendall Fuller, and he had a really good ball to Ray McLeod, who beat a corner whose number I couldn't see. But I thought Cousins, after a bit of a slow start, really settled in. I want to say he missed 3 of his first 4 throws. And you're kind of watching, and you're like, huh, interesting. All right. And he kind of found his stride. The offense around him kind of started to click. I thought Penix went 8 of 16. The numbers are not representative of, in my mind, how well he played. There was I want to say Jason McClellan had a drop right sideline where he caught it, lost it, caught it, and then dropped it, came back and knocked out 10 push-ups because of it. And then there was another throw that he had to Hodge on the right sideline where I think Kadero caught it, but it was rolled out of bounds. That was still a very strong throw. And the one thing about Penix that I saw that I really liked is after the open practice at the high school and then the open practice in Mercedes-Benz, I felt like he was a bit timid playing in front of the fans, perhaps a little bit scared, antsy. He did not show any of that yesterday or today for that matter. But, specifically on yesterday, he was very effective, very aggressive. And I think you like that. If you're going to have a young quarterback with a big arm, you want him to try to show it off. There was only one of those 16 passes that was, at risk, and it was not, picked off. And he made some really impressive throws. And again, I mentioned the throw that he had Monday to Ross Dwelly or to Blair. He made one to Ross Dwelly yesterday where his eyes started left. He could feel the pressure coming from his blind side. His eyes immediately rolled right, and then he threw a really strong pass to Ross Dwelly for about an 8-yard completion over the middle. And so that, again, for me, not the flashiest of plays, but it tells me that A, he knows the offense, B, he's seeing the field well and really feeling it well. And again, for a rookie quarterback, I think that's progress, because I thought even as like recent as late last week, there was a few times where I thought he wasn't seeing it as quickly as what he needed to. And so that part was encouraging. I thought I thought that, Atlanta's first team defense had it rough early. I mean, it was a lot of chunk plays. I saw Tyreek Hill beat Mike Hughes for about a 50-yard touchdown left sideline. That was kind of the expected result for a lot of people, I think, is that Atlanta's secondary would have a rough go in Miami. That felt like the moment where everything kind of shifted. Atlanta's front began, I thought Atlanta brought a lot of very creative blitz packages, a lot of safety blitzes, a lot of corner blitzes. It was a very interesting display after that, to where they started, they generated enough instant pressure to where Miami couldn't really take those shots anymore. And I think if you're the Falcons, that's where you're going to have to try to find pass rush success this year. And it worked, because after that long touchdown, things kind of slowed for Miami. I thought Atlanta. I still think Miami's offense won the day yesterday. I think Atlanta's offense probably beat Miami just a little bit. Um, but the Falcons, for how rough yesterday started, I thought recovered well to where it's like, okay, this is a Miami team that won, I believe, 11 games last year, has reached the postseason each of the last 2 seasons. It's a really good football team. Practicing without Jalen Waddle, I will note, but I thought the Falcons responded really well. And that kind of led me to think, I was excited to see how it would play out today, which I'll hit on in a little bit. But it was a pretty impressive finish for Atlanta. I thought a very resilient finish for how it started. And again, I thought for where Atlanta was after the first about half hour of that session, I exited feeling a little bit more optimistic about the team than how it started.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's always a good thing. Like, and like, there, nobody's making excuses for anything or whatever. But like, when you're the team that travels to the joint practice, like the team that's when it's just like an away game. Like you're going to someone else's home turf. They're comfortable, all this stuff. They've been practicing on this field for the past 2 weeks, whatever have you. Like you're gonna have a slight disadvantage, and like that makes sense. But like, yeah, I mean, you shouldn't get embarrassed, and it sounds like, especially the first day, like it started off a little shaky, which again, pretty common thing in away games, that the visitor is going to start a little slow, but it sounds like by the end that there was a rebound, and you didn't leave, feeling too down on the team. But Adnan, I want to open the floor to you too if you have any questions about joint practices.
Yeah, no, I know we got some report about the trenches. Can you speak a little bit on the offensive and defensive line? Because I saw specifically, I want to know if we saw anything from Zach Harrison, because as is customary, the depth chart also released, and now we have, just a million things to talk about and a small window to talk about it in. Whereas, about a month ago, we were just grasping at anything to just talk about, just begging the Falcons to give us anything. And now, we went from a drought to a complete flood. And I noticed in the depth chart that Zach Harrison is the starting right defensive end, which sort of opened my eyes a little bit. Well, right defensive end in a 3-4, which means he's still an interior pass rusher. He's not, on the edge anymore. And that's another thing I saw in Monday's practice. Even when they go to a 4-3, I saw Zach Harrison playing on the inside of it, which is interesting. He's that left defensive tackle in the 4-3. But yeah, I do want to know about Zach Harrison specifically, and I want to know about the Falcons' defensive line as a whole, and the pass rush as a whole, as well as the offensive line. Just more than anything, I want to know about the trenches.
Yeah. So with this answer, I'm going to incorporate a little bit of what happened earlier this morning as well on this, because I think it's an important part to now kind of incorporate the whole thing. I thought yesterday Atlanta's defensive line was a bit rough. Um, Again, a lot of the pressure that it created came from when they would have to bring extra and kind of leave it more susceptible to explosives out back. I thought today was a lot better, a lot better. With Zach Harrison in particular, have not really seen Zach do a whole lot. It's been a lot inside. It's been a lot of inside. He's played. He hasn't necessarily been an impactful player. There was a pressure that he had. I want to say it was yesterday, where he was involved in it, but he has not been overly disruptive, is how I would frame it. I think, defending the run, Atlanta has been stout as a whole, and he has been an important part in that, along with that whole rotation up front. In terms of guys who've stood out up front, I think Arnold Ebiketie has had a very good week here. He had three pressures in the first probably 20 minutes of the session earlier today, which again, for me, he was one of the main winners that I saw. He was winning with speed. He was winning on a few of the stunts that Atlanta pulled out. For a guy who I thought was a bit up and down in Flowery Branch, I thought Ebiketie had a really, really good afternoon today. We've seen, I thought that Smith Williams had a few really good run stops. He sets a really good edge. Every time that I watch him, he sets a firm edge, very reliable run defender. I think I saw Eddie. I want to say I saw Eddie Goldman get 1 or 2 stops yesterday and then 1 or 2 today. To where again he's primarily a rundown player. Um, Atlanta's front again rotated a lot, but one of the things that impressed me today, I saw Ruka Rororo sniff out a screen entirely, like to where I think Tua had to. I want to say he completed it, but it was like caught and then blown dead because like Rook was on top of the guy who caught the pass. So it was one of those things where like he saw it, he felt it, and for a rookie, kind of like what I said earlier uh, with Penix, to see, the instincts and how fast they're seeing it at this stage is very impressive to me. Um, that part was good. Lorenzo Carter drew some praise yesterday. I wasn't as high on his day. He had a couple pressures, but it wasn't necessarily natural pressures. Maybe a little bit more unblocked and some Miami miscues above all else. But again, I thought yesterday Tua had a lot of time when Atlanta only brought 4. Today, I felt like Atlanta's front was there more often. I saw Trice converge with AK on Tua. That was a very, if you're trying to pull positives, which I think a lot of people are. It's August, right? That's what August is for. You're very excited about that. And Trice was absent yesterday with an illness. Still was not completely healthy. Was actually kind of questionable. He was planning on kind of trying it out in walkthroughs earlier and then reevaluating. It was hot, and if you're sick and it's hot outside, it's not a great combination. But he persevered, and I thought was actually quite impressive. Earlier today, before the session, Raheem mentioned Anyamata. He mentioned Contavious Street. He mentioned Taquan Graham, Brandon Dorless. All of those guys, he said, were very impressive to him yesterday. And again, I thought today was an even stronger overall showing. As far as the offensive line, the Falcons starters, I want to say there was maybe 1 or 2 plays yesterday and 1 play today where Kirk Cousins was at risk of a sack or of a play around his feet. So I thought from a pass protection standpoint, it was very good. Kind of the same thing with Penix as well. As far as run blocking, Atlanta's first team rushing attack yesterday was not very good. Not a whole lot of efficiency. That's kind of been a thing that I've seen throughout camp. And at times it's been good, and at times it's been stonewalled. I think Adnan would probably agree with that. It's been a little up and down. I kind of think Bijan Robinson in particular has fought some efficiency questions, efficiency problems at various points as a runner in camp. And so yesterday was kind of more of that. You'd have a couple of solid runs and a couple not so good runs. The second team offensive line, meanwhile, had a lot of success running right, which is not surprising when you think about the group that line has, with Ryan Newsel at center, with Kyle Hinton at right guard, with Storm Gordon at right tackle. Those are the only 3 offensive linemen on the second team whom I feel confident saying will be on the roster come September. And Atlanta had a lot of success running behind them. It was not the same today. Ryan Newsel was out with a calf injury that he suffered yesterday, a strained calf. And the line, as a result, Atlanta's second team rushing offense was very inefficient. I thought that Carlos Washington was very good yesterday. Had a lot of really good runs and had a lot more touches than what McClellan had, which to me, after the Monday that he had working with the ones, it felt like he was in a really good spot. And then today, I want to say he only had 3 carries and McClellan had 5, and there was not a whole lot of success from either one of them. A lot of very early penetration, early pressure, to where there wasn't a whole lot of room to work. But so, overall, I thought Atlanta's offensive line, the starters were pretty good. And I think the second team with the guys who will be on the roster were also pretty good. I think, when you look at Atlanta's pass rush, I still think the edge is a bit questionable. If you get the Ikic from today, I think it'll be just fine. I think you start thinking about players who people feel like are important for Atlanta to have a plus pass rush, whether it's, Zach Harrison, Graham, obviously Jared Onyemata. There were some positives from most of them. I still think the interior is where Atlanta's strongest up front. I think there's still a lot of questions about how they'll be able to, scheme up pressure off the edge. They have shown very encouraging signs, though, of being able to, bring pressures and various looks to where I think I want to say even Kirk Cousins and Flowery Branch last week touched about how like they throw out looks that look the same but are far from it when they actually throw it out there. So, people look at the way that they've rotated and say, okay, how do you plan on having success with this if this guy's only in on running downs and this guy's only in on passing downs? Well, I think what they're showing here is that they plan on having various looks in that and having various roles, and they've had outside linebackers dropping just about as much as they've had them rushing. And so there's a lot of different ways that you can create that pressure. And I think that the way that they've thrown these corner blitzes out has been very successful, very efficient. They've had a lot of unblocked looks as a result of it. And so I think if you're looking at pass rush as a whole, today was a very good day for Atlanta. A very, very good day, very impressive day, and a day that eased my personal concerns about what, this pass rush could be.
Yeah, and I know the Dolphins have made a concerted effort to improve their offensive line. I know Aaron Brewer left, I think, practice at some point today. So certainly that's something to take into account. But you have to play with the guys you got, right? And the same thing for the Falcons' second string offensive line. They lost Ryan Newsel. They had to make do. And it sounds like they struggled. The same thing with the Dolphins. Like, they lose Aaron Brewer. You lose a starter, it's going to be tough. But rarely our NFL team's going to be completely healthy. So, you can't use that as an excuse. But, yeah, I like what I'm hearing. I mean, and this is kind of what we expected, right? Like, they're going to have to cook it up, right? We're going to have to let them cook, because if they just like go out there, vanilla, it's not going to, like the Ryan Nielsen style. Like, it's not going to work with this group. And it seems like there's been some creativity. I know in these practices, sometimes the coaches are a little bit, sensitive to seeing this exotic stuff. But, I mean, if I was Miami, I think in the preseason game, calling exotic blitz packages is kind of a dick move. So we'll see if the Falcons do that. But, I think in practice, it's what you want. Like, you don't want vanilla in practice. You want your quarterback to see a bunch of crazy stuff, right? I mean, you want them to be as prepared as possible, and there's only so much you can do in practice, but getting pressure put on is good for various reasons. And, I know fans will feel some security knowing that the Falcons offensive line held up against this Miami pass rush, which, again, this is something that the Dolphins have really tried to inject a lot of cap and money into and draft picks. I know Chop Robinson was supposedly someone who had a good first day, certainly. But yeah, I mean, it sounds encouraging. Like, I know that, like, after the first day, there was definitely some dooming going on the timeline. Like, oh, we're not, as good as the Dolphins. And, like, even if the Falcons weren't as good as the Dolphins, like, the Dolphins were an 11-win team last year. Obviously they fall off in December every year, but, like, still, like, this is and
we're in August.
Yeah.
Like, we're not even into the cold weather yet. This is when they're actually good.
Yeah. So I like, for me personally, I was like, I just want the Falcons to look like they're on par with the Dolphins. Like, they don't need to beat the Dolphins or look like better than the Dolphins in Miami. Like, that's a tall order. I just want them to look like they're competitive with the Dolphins. And I think after 2 days, that's kind of the takeaway, is that the Falcons are competitive with the Miami Dolphins, a playoff team that looks great early in the season typically. So, this should be the Dolphins. Like, this is the preseason. This should be the Dolphins at their best, if we're going off of that. So, but Adnan, I'll let you go too. Yeah, go ahead, Daniel. Yeah.
Well, I was going to say, yeah, like, for me personally, I was kind of thinking about that on my walk back from the stadium, that I was trying to think. I assumed that someone would ask who won. And I'm not sure you could say who won. I think it's because they had so many various periods to where you could pick out winners from each period. But by the end of the day, it was a very evenly balanced, practice. I thought yesterday, again, I might have had Miami with a slight edge, if anything, because, again, I thought Miami won the first half. Yesterday, Atlanta won the second half. Today, I think Atlanta might have had the edge. But again, it was a very balanced session to where, if you're the Falcons, I think you walk out of it saying, like, hey, we are right on par with these guys. Like, I really think that part of it's very encouraging. One other thing that I wanted to mention, a few other things, actually, if it's all right.
Go for it.
Zach Robinson's offense, I thought, the shifts, the motions were very, very good. That's one thing that, we've heard since he arrived, is like, hey, this offense will be heavy on shifts, a lot of pre-snap motions. It is true. Yes, that is exactly what the offense is. It is heavy shift, heavy motion. I asked him back in June, it obviously sounds great, but how do you make sure it's not eye candy? What we've seen so far is it's definitely not. Like, I think Atlanta's had a lot of like receiver handoffs on like those reverse concepts, and it's been cool to see that, to where it adds that extra thought to where maybe it shifts the linebacker, opens up a hole inside for whoever's at running back, and that part to me, I think Adnan and I had a little bit of a joke in camp that Atlanta's preferred route on the entire tree is that like 10-yard stop route, 5-yard stop route. There's been a whole lot of those still.
From the
And
slot, right out of the
yep,
slot.
yep. And as a result, Kyle Pitts had, I want to say, 2 or 3 catches yesterday and about 3 or 4 of them today. Not all in that role, but there was a lot of times there was pretty quick stuff. I thought Pitts actually today had 2 about 15 to 20-yard receptions that were very, very solid. But that's beside the point. I think Zach Robinson's offense, for a guy who, again, this was he called it a little bit last year in the preseason with the Rams. But this was his first 2 practices as, the actual OC calling it against, a team, and that's not his own. And I thought he handled it really well. I also thought, I thought that the way that Atlanta's offense approached it with, I think Penix took a lot more shots than what Kirk did. Again, Penix very aggressive. Perhaps it's youthful arrogance. Perhaps it's the fact that he's got one of the strongest arms I've ever seen, and he trusts it, and he just lets it fly, which I completely respect. But with Cousins, Atlanta moved it pretty well in 11 on 11. I think today they might have been 0 for 2 on scoring in those situations. One of them, the drive ended early with a fumbled snap. The other one, it ended about a yard or 2 short in a situation where, if needed, I would imagine, would have kept the offense on the field. But from an offensive standpoint, because I don't feel like I've talked enough about the unit as a whole, they've moved the ball at a really good clip. There's been maybe 1 or 2 drives out of the 7 or 8 that they've had where it's like, that wasn't pretty. But for the most part, they've involved Moody. As Adnan mentioned, at the Friday practice at Mercedes-Benz, they've been able to move it around a lot of different weapons this summer, but when needed, there's always London. Here in Miami, they have really spread it out. It's been Mooney with 3, it's been Pitts with 3, it's been London with 3, 2, however many, to where it's a consistently balanced attack. Robinson and Algier are involved in it too. It is a very evenly dispersed passing attack with a good amount of creativity. And for a Falcons offense that has been frequently, dogged for a lack of spacing, I don't think, from what I've seen, that'll be a problem this year.
Yeah, it sounds very encouraging, and I was particularly happy. It sounds like Kyle Pitts was a focal point today, and I know a lot of people have been excited about that and seeing that, so I'm glad we got a chance to put that on display as well. But yeah, Adnan, I wanted to give you a chance to weigh in here too, or ask any further questions you have about these practices.
Yeah, no, I was gonna say it's you're getting the hopes of those fantasy football players up with Kyle Pitts, and then you're shooting them down with the Tyler Algier report that he's getting a lot of looks, because he's getting a lot of looks along with Bijan Robinson. It's not just that bell cow Bijan work that we were expecting, but maybe they have something up their sleeve for Bijan. But yeah, the other thing I want to know about is the secondary. Because I think Jalen Waddle was out each of these 2 days, but the Dolphins still employ Tyreek Hill, who has a shout for being the best wide receiver in football. And I figured there's no more difficult test in football than lining up one-on-one against Tyreek Hill, at the very least from the cornerback position. And Daniel, you and I sort of joked, and I even tweeted out the joke last week, that Mike Hughes has better job security than the mayor right now. Like, Mike Hughes is the cornerback 2 of this team. He never leaves the field whenever the ones are out there. At the Mercedes-Benz practice, I saw Clark Phillips get some run with the ones, but that was in relief of AJ Terrell, not Mike Hughes. Mike Hughes stayed on the field for all of those snaps. So not only is this not a competition for cornerback 2 right now, but right now it feels like Mike Hughes has better job security than anyone not named Kirk Cousins on this roster. I say that slightly facetiously, but yeah, I do want to know. I do want to know how the secondary did, specifically Mike Hughes and Richie Grant, because those are the two sort of points of weakness in the secondary. Let's just call a spade here.
Yeah, so I do think it's important to note with Miami's offense, as you mentioned, Waddle was out yesterday and today, and Tyreek was not a very prominent figure in how many snaps he played today. And so you didn't get maybe a fully representative idea of that as far as seeing their true A offense. But, apart from the 50-yard play that Hill had on Hughes yesterday, I thought Hughes played all right. He had a pick late yesterday on Tua. But again, this was also created because Atlanta brought some pressure that I think Tua saw pre-snap, so he drifted to his left and then kind of just threw to a spot. I want to say it was River Craycraft is who he was throwing to, and he kind of just picked a spot, and I don't think Craycraft expected the ball to be thrown when it was, and so Hughes just kind of had it fall like right into his hands. I'm not sure he even had to move, so it worked out well for him. But the way that he started Atlanta's whole secondary yesterday, it was very leaky. I think Tua started like 3 for his first 4. Today was a lot better. I think Clark Phillips. It's funny because I think throughout camp, Clark Phillips has been better than Hughes. I really do. And yesterday was the same deal. Clark had a really good pass breakup in the team portion. He had a really good interception in one-on-ones. He had another really good pass breakup in one-on-ones. He played really well. He got beat once by Tyreek, but he also was in phase with Hill again a little bit later on. And again, Tyreek was a tough cover for everybody yesterday. He had a route on AJ Terrell in one-on-ones that was pretty good coverage. He still had a pretty solid catch. And then he had another rep in one-on-one or in the 11-on-11 later on where he beat Terrell so bad that one of the other reporters looked at me and asked what happened to AJ. And I was like, what? I thought he got hurt. And he was just like, no, Tyreek was just wide open. I was like, oh, okay, sure. So, it was one of those deals where Tyreek was pretty much uncoverable for everybody. But, today – I was kind of racking my brain for this, and I'm not sure I can recall a time where I saw Hughes get like legitimately beat. Or really anybody in the secondary. I thought today was a very strong secondary showing from Atlanta. I think Richie Grant's had a really good few days here. Almost had a pick today. You could tell Tua wasn't comfortable, which again I think links back to the pressure Atlanta brought. A lot of simulated pressures. According to Raheem, a lot of late night thoughts have gone into creating innovative packages. I asked him about that today. He was happy that I used the phrase sim pressure. Yeah, I think it's going to be an interesting situation when you get into those environments where, you have to bring more than 4 and you are trying to run some more creative packages with those cat blitzes and how you handle those, because the touchdown to Hill yesterday against Hughes happened with no safety help. And I don't think you want Mike Hughes on Tyreek Hill one-on-one in any situation at all whatsoever. And if, a situation arises where you have Hughes on Hill, you got to have some type of help there. And again, in that situation, you can't bring it, extra players from the back end. And so it's a tough game. It's a game they'll have to balance throughout the year. I think they'll probably lose out on that. I remember a few years ago, I think it was 2022 with Pease calling it. Atlanta made it to like week 16 without allowing a play of 20 plus yards. I think this year might be a little bit more hit or miss on that front. But it's the risk they're going to have to take. From a secondary, again, as a whole, I thought Richie Grant spent a lot more time with the ones. He's been the one next to Bates throughout training camp, obviously. But it feels like there was a little bit more of a rotation there. There's been very little rotation from what I've seen with him and Helms. So those are kind of the two spots with, Hughes and Richie that a lot of people thought maybe flipped entering camp that it feels like are still very much set for right now. But again, I think Richie's played well too. Like he has not been a liability very often, I feel like. And so that's a paramount point to make. The secondary today, there was one play where Craycraft beat AJ Terrell by a couple steps deep and Tua overthrew it. That would have been a lengthy touchdown. That was about as close as Miami got to hitting a big play with the ones. The twos had a little bit more success But Atlanta's second team defense today was kind of interesting because you could tell they were trying to kind of rotate in some guys that maybe hadn't played as much on Tuesday. And so you had a lot of like the third and fourth string secondary guys playing against Miami's second team offense. And that went about it as you would expect for a majority of it. And then Atlanta's secondary had a stretch against Skylar Thompson at QB for Miami, where Anthony Johnson and then a few undrafted rookies and Jaden Price and Trey Vaval all had pass breakups on, again, like 3 consecutive throws. So it reached a point where I thought Atlanta's secondary, I think it was a lot better today. One, I will say that. But again, to where I thought Hughes held his own today. I think Clark Phillips has had a really good 2 days here. And Raheem today was asked about, how he felt those guys played. And I'm pulling up the quote right now, but it was a lot of praise. He felt like Clark played really well yesterday. He thought that Hughes responded really well. And so I think that Raheem's going to leave this feeling relatively confident in what they have back there. I still think what I saw from Mike Hughes, I'd be a little bit skeptical. But it also, again, to kind of play with the joke, I'm not really sure that his job is anywhere close to being at risk either, which we'll see how that plays out. But I think there's a very real chance that Clark Phillips ends up playing real time in some capacity at some point this year. Because kind of like last year, I think it reached a point where he was just playing at too high of a level where they couldn't keep him off the field. And I think that might happen again this year because he is a ball player in the truest form of it. And so I think he's been really impressive here.
Yeah. No, I mean, I'm excited about Clark Phillips. I think he's going to find his way on the field one way or another, just kind of like last year, right? I mean, he didn't play until later, but, he did get out there. I think it's the same story this year. Yeah, I mean, I'm certainly happy to hear that Richie Grant is playing well. I mean, I need at least one UCF legend to come through this year. I need one of them to work out. So maybe it's Richie Grant. I think more people would have probably, I think people were probably pretty negative on both guys. But if they could get Richie Grant playing like we hope that he could, I mean, this is a big year for him. Like contract year, Richie Grant. Like let's see what happens. But I would certainly be happy if he turned into the guy we all have hoped that he could be. And then with Mike Hughes, I think they're hoping for solid from him. I just wonder if Clark Phillips can give more than solid. That's kind of the question. I think Mike Hughes will be solid as an outside corner. I think it's like you probably want to aim higher than that. But they have not really at this point. I think they're sort of hoping that Hughes can be better than solid, or maybe Clark Phillips can, and we haven't quite got there yet. But certainly doesn't sound like, again, Miami, like especially Tyreek Hill, like I'm never gonna be upset about, like, you could say like Jalen Ramsey got burned by Tyreek Hill, and I'm like, okay, yeah, sure, like that doesn't faze me. Like, yes, Tyreek Hill burned someone. Wow, that's crazy. I've never heard that before. Like Tyreek Hill burns everybody. Okay, Tyreek Hill's arguably the best receiver in the NFL. So like it's gonna happen. It's gonna happen to any corner. It's gonna happen to any corner with safety help sometimes. Like that's just who Tyreek Hill is. So would it be nice if AJ Terrell locked down Tyreek Hill? Absolutely. Is it, particularly likely that he's going to be able to lock down Tyreek Hill for an entire practice or an entire game or anything like that? No. So you just need him to lock him down enough that you can win the football game. That's basically, what you're hoping for with Tyreek Hill and any top receiver. So not overly concerned there. It's disappointing to not see Jalen Waddle. You would love to have Waddle and Tyreek Hill there to just, I mean, that's a test, right? That is an epic test for your quarterbacks. To see if you can cover Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill. But, not going to see that, unfortunately. It's disappointing, but certainly, it sounds like who they've been lining up against, especially today, they were doing a great job. So happy to hear that. Before we do have a question from Corey, I want to get to real quick before we sign off. But before we do, want to remind folks, please like, subscribe, leave us that 5-star review. Please do support us on Patreon or on the YouTube channel memberships. I know we had a new sign up in David Thompson, so welcome David Thompson to the Falcoholic crew. We appreciate you. And yeah, if you want to get in on those Falcoholic fantasy leagues, I know I said I would put out an update last week. Had some personal stuff come up, so that did not happen, but I will be putting out one within the next day or two, so appreciate your patience on that. But we will be having the Falcoholic fantasy leagues. The drafts are going to start probably between the second and third week of the preseason, something like that, so in a couple weeks. We'll keep you guys posted. But yeah, sign up there within the next few weeks if you want to get in on those. We're gonna have a Google form to fill out for those that are signed up to make sure that we get everyone in that wants to play. Appreciate you. And yeah, let's get to it. So we have a question from Corey, the $2. Thank you, Corey. He says, "What is the overwhelming opinion on Carlos Washington? I hear the coaching staff loves him, and also have you guys seen anything out of CFL receiver Austin Mack?" So I know you guys touched on Washington. It sounds like he's been impressive. Let's touch on Washington first. It sounds like he's in play for the roster. I think a lot of people assumed that Jason McClellan was going to run away with that, but it seems like Washington, at least over the past few practices, has been pretty impressive.
John Robinson clone is what Raheem Morris called him yesterday. Referred to him as. He said he has Bijan-like qualities. That's not something that I think should be taken lightly at all. I mean, you're going to come out and say that about a guy who, had, I think, 1,500 all-purpose yards last year. It's very impressive, very high praise. Yeah, I think Washington, the one thing about him that's impressed me from the start of camp, very decisive runner. His feet and his eyes feel like they're always in sync. And it feels like he's going to maximize a lot of the runs. I think he's got more shake than what I initially thought for a guy who is about, I want to say like 5'11", 210, potentially even a little bit more. He's a pretty good sized back. And so, Raheem mentioned yesterday, he's got some juice to him as well. And very hard worker, a guy that Atlanta's running backs coach is very fond of hard working and how he's approaching things. And a guy who's a lot more comfortable, a lot more confident this year than he was at this time last year. And who should be trending towards not only a roster spot, but I would tend to think a pretty big preseason workload that that'll probably ultimately determine the roster. Because again, I think it's going to be a little bit close, but for where he's at now, I think he has safely been Atlanta's. He is behind Bijan and Algier, and I'm not really sure that McClellan has been overly close from what I've seen.
Yeah, obviously with McClellan missing a lot of offseason time too, like early with his pre-draft injury, he was going to have to impress to get above the guys in the depth chart. And I think maybe we didn't give Carlos Washington enough respect going into camp that, with McClellan already having a disadvantage, that it was going to be really hard to overtake him. I just want the best guys to make the roster. Certainly no shade directed towards Carlos Washington or Jason McClellan. It's going to be a tough battle, and we'll see over the next couple days. Maybe this first preseason game will give us a clue as well, because these guys are going to play quite a bit. We'll see who comes out on top. But yeah, Adnan, any Carlos Washington takes, and then have you seen anything from Alex Mack? Or excuse me, not Alex Mack. Yeah, please, Alex Mack, come back to Atlanta. We would love that. But yeah,
Alex Mack.
Austin Mack, another Mack, maybe future Falcons legend. We'll see. But
with Carlos Washington, I was looking at the depth chart, and one of the things I saw where I'm like, okay, this is kind of bullshit. Excuse my language, is I'm seeing Carlos Washington as RB5 behind Avery Williams and Jason McClellan, and yeah, I don't buy that at all. Just given the fact that Washington has now taken over the majority of the handoffs from the second team as of Friday, and then now that he's getting that work with the first team, both at joint practices and at Monday's practice, it feels like Washington is going to sort of take this. In my opinion, I just have this feeling that Washington is going to take this RB3 job and run with it. Like, no disrespect to Jason McClellan, but he is a rookie. We all really liked what we saw from Carlos Washington, last year. But he just sort of didn't. And Washington himself, in an interview on Monday, we got a chance to speak with him after practice. He himself said that he's really looking to not leave as much meat on the bone as he had last year. He said he was, not that he was kicking himself, but that he does regret not sort of taking that full opportunity that he had last year in the preseason. And then we got a chance, to talk to the Falcons running backs coach, Michael Petrie, as well. And, Michael said that his advice to Carlos Washington was, just go out there and stop thinking so much. Go out there, play football, have some fun. And it does feel like Washington this year will sort of heed that advice a little bit. And, it's one of those things, as the old saying goes, there's no replacement for experience. And, he has that experience of what he didn't do last year. And I think this year is really going to sort of run with it. And sitting here today as of August 7th, I'm going to say that I'm pretty confident that Washington's going to win that RB3 spot, as crazy as it sounds, before we've even, kicked off in our first preseason game, because he's just sort of looked that impressive. And I think that he's going to be on this 53 man. As for Mac, not really. Like, I haven't really seen much from him in the preseason. I don't know if that changed in joint practice, if he, went out there and beat Jalen Ramsey one-on-one or anything like that. But yeah, it just sort of feels like he was one of those wide receivers who it feels like he was sort of a bit of a jag during that first like week and a half of training camp. I'm not saying that he didn't do anything, but I think he caught like a couple passes from Michael Penix. He had his routes against air like everyone else, but he didn't really do anything to stand out to me.
Yeah, no, fair enough. And again, there's some guys are going to stand out and some guys aren't, and that doesn't necessarily mean they can't cut it in the NFL. It's just that's how it goes. You only have so many practice reps to stand out, and sometimes the ball just doesn't come your way. But yeah, it seems quiet right now. That's kind of been my read as well. Is that sort of your read as well, Daniel? Austin Mack been pretty quiet.
Yeah, it's funny because like he came out in camp and he was like, when Atlanta split into fields for walkthroughs, Mac was with the first and second team offense. Like he was on the field with the ones and twos. He was not playing necessarily with like once they progressed into 11 and 11s, he was not in that rotation, in that mix. He was watching, which again would imply that he was in that second string role. And so I think it's, that kind of made me think like, oh, wow, they must feel like really fond of him. And then again, eventually it just kind of progressed to where he went back to the field with the other team. And yeah, he really hasn't done a whole lot. Which again, compared to, where he started camp and the group that he started it with, I think Atlanta liked how he looked in the early part of the summer. But other than that, I mean, he hasn't really been a very prominent part of the offense. It feels like when Atlanta puts Penix out there and it's a lot of the reserve offensive players, a lot of the time his targets have been Rondale Moore, and then a lot of Josh Ali, a lot of Chris Blair, with some Casey Washington mixed in as well. And so like those are the four that when I think about who Penix has thrown to so far, obviously Rondale's kind of out of that mix, it would appear, for now, unfortunately. But those are kind of the four in that group. I don't really think Mac so far. He's probably going to need a pretty big preseason, I would say.
Yeah, and it's going to be always one of the most interesting things to watch in preseason is how these receivers look, in live action. Because doing it in shorts is one thing, doing it in full contact is another. So we'll see how that shakes out. But again, like really, what it's going to come down to, honestly, for these last couple guys is special teams, right? I mean, everyone gets into the preseason highlights and it's fun. I mean, and I'm going to get into it, I'm sure, but you got to play special teams. If you're the wide receiver 5, if you're the wide receiver 6, you got to be a core special teamer to make the roster. You got to be able to do it. And Max certainly has the body type to do it. At this point, it's hard to say how well he's performing on special teams because they just don't spend a lot of time on it in training camp, but we'll see some of it in preseason. And look, if Mac is playing with like the first team special teams unit or something like that, that would obviously be a great sign for his chances of making the roster. So I would definitely pay attention to that as well to see if that's something that he is doing. Especially considering early on in camp he was kind of high up the depth, like higher up the depth chart than he is now. And as unfortunate as it is for Rondale Moore, there will be an opportunity for someone else to make the roster if he's not able to play this year. So we'll just have to see who that is. It's the sad business of the NFL. Someone exits, someone enters. And hopefully Rondale Moore's okay. It looked bad, but hopefully we got some guys in the wings that can step in if he has to miss time. So yeah, well, I think we've covered pretty well tonight. Appreciate my co-host Adnan and Daniel for sticking out for an almost hour and a half show here. So we're going to go ahead and wrap up, guys. Thank you so much for hanging out. Like I said, like, subscribe. Please do leave that 5-star review in your podcast platform of choice. Check out the Patreon. Check out the channel membership. If you're interested in playing fantasy, if you're interested in supporting the show, getting some early access content, we will be starting up the Q&As again once we get into the season. So there's always those shows as well that are a lot of fun. So consider that. And also, of course, strongly consider giving @ByDanielFlick a follow. He is Daniel Flick over at Sports Illustrated's Falcon Report. Anything else you'd like to plug, Daniel, before we sign off tonight?
SI.com/NFL/Falcons for I'm probably planning on writing a lot of like longer form feature stories now in the coming days. Got a lot of pretty cool stuff. A lot of front seven guys. A pretty heavy look at it. There's probably about 12 dudes who are like in that rotation right now, and I've probably got features coming out on like 4 or 5 of them. So I don't know why, but I'm just fascinated by those guys. So some pretty cool stories to tell them there. Very excited to tell them. As always, appreciate you all having me on. Adnan, actually, each of you, I missed your presence today and yesterday in Miami Gardens. But I'm already counting down the days until next training camp. We're at about 11 and a half months until we're back together in Flowery Branch. So excited for it.
Yep, we're counting down the days already. But thank you, Daniel, for your intrepid reporting, and I'm sure we'll get more reports.
Let's skip over the season though. Like
let's.
Training camp is great, and we all love it. But let's also enjoy the season. Like, let's not wish the season away.
I sure hope so. Yeah.
Oh no, I'm with you.
Yeah, unless it's like the last 7 years actually, where we get into November and we're like, all right, let's fast forward to the end of it.
For those joining us now that didn't hear about the Rondale Moore injury, it was a lower right leg injury that he had to be carted off in an air cast. So looks like a serious injury. We'll obviously hope for the best there, but we don't have any firm reporting in terms of the actual extent yet. I'm sure he's going to get looked at thoroughly. So maybe tomorrow we'll know. Probably we'll see. But that's the update there. Well, of course, also with us tonight, my co-host Adnan Ikic. He's at Say Which Way. Adnan, anything you would like to let the people know about?
I'll just plug Falcoholic.com. I know, especially during training camp time, things move so fast because there's a practice every day, and I guess these articles are absolutely obsolete at this point. But if you do want to go through and read in depth about each of the Falcons practices through Monday before joint practices, those are all on the Falcoholic.com. Put in a lot of hours writing all of those. So if you are curious, or maybe if you just want to go back and just read back through day one again, those are all on the Falcoholic.com. I think it will be cool, maybe 10 years from now, if the site isn't completely like destroyed and eradicated at that point, going back and reading through some of those articles of 2022 Falcons training camp news and notes. This is what was going on, and you can sort of go with those blasts from the past names. So that's just I'm not really plugging that for 10 years from now. I'm just talking about that for us personally, where I think that's going to be pretty cool looking back on that.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be really. Yeah, go ahead, Daniel. Yeah.
I want to take a moment to brag on Adnan for Friday night at Mercedes-Benz, leaving at like 10:30, and him and I couldn't get out for a little while, but then he had like an hour drive back home with 30 minutes of traffic and got back at about midnight, I think you said, or 12:30 or somewhere around there, and had to stay up and wrote your article afterwards, and you went to bed about 2 a.m. or so, and then we're up at about 7. That was incredibly gritty, and that was something that a lot of people, I think, respect. And Adnan, there's a reason that you boomed as much as you did in camp, and I'm so happy for your brother because you worked so hard for it. So yes, everybody watching, I'm sure you all have already read it, but just please, like, he deserves a read. He deserves as much as it is, because it truly was incredible coverage.
I appreciate that, buddy, and it's right back at you. I feel like we both put in a lot of work, and I saw all the hours that you were putting in as well, and I feel like even though we're not from the big networks, I feel like our coverage was the most comprehensive. Like, you know, there's, being humble to a certain degree, but also it's like, all right, like, yeah, Daniel, I've read all of your articles every day on SI.com as well. And, I know the work that I put in as well. And I don't think anyone had any more comprehensive coverage that was at Flowery Branch than you or I this year.
Yeah. No,
Yeah,
certainly
man, I'm
agree with
proud
you
of what we
guys.
did.
Yeah, I am too. I'm real proud of you guys, and obviously disappointed to not be there myself, but I felt like it wasn't a big deal because you guys were able to crush it so much that I could absorb it all through just talking with you guys on here, and I'm sure the fans feel the same way, so thank you guys so much for your coverage. It was a big boost to all of us that want the details, want the nitty gritty. Does it really matter? Maybe not. Who cares? We want to hear about it, right? That's why we're fans. We want to hear about it. We want to know about it. We want to enjoy the coverage, and you guys made that a lot easier.
Yeah.
So,
And let me
thank
tweet about it next year, Falcons.
yeah. But we'll have to cross that bridge. We'll work on that. We'll work on that this year. But thank you guys so much for the coverage. I'm Kevin Knight of Falcoholic, Kevin as well. We'll have lots more coming to you guys on the Falcoholic Live, and of course, our not play-by-play preseason Week 1 watch party coming to you on Friday. Probably going live like 10 minutes or so before the game starts, something like that, and we'll take you through the whole game. Enjoying that and having a good time. So definitely join us on Friday if you're a preseason degenerate like us. We will be here through the fourth quarter. It will happen. So if everyone else in your family gets bored watching Taylor Heineke deep into the fourth quarter, we or Nathan Rourke even, we're gonna be getting
Rourke,
we gotta yeah.
Hey.
Yes, so we're gonna have to come up with a good Nathan Rourke name. It was so easy when we had the simulator and Matt Sims, but we're gonna have to come up with a good Nathan Rourke name here. But we will. And yeah, Taylor, I should be there next year at camp, as far as I know. I mean, we'll see. But yeah, I mean, at this point, yes, I'm planning to be back covering stuff, and I should be at maybe a game or two this year as well. We'll see. Yeah. So thanks, guys, so much. Thanks to Daniel, and thanks to Adnan once again. Like, subscribe, all that good stuff. We will see you guys on Friday for the Falcons vs. Dolphins preseason watch party. Until then, have a great night. Thank you once again for joining us. We will see you then, guys. Have a great night. See ya.